So I decided that if I wanted to be more financially resilient, then I had to consume a lot more financial content. So I decided to watch everybody's favorite finance movie, The Wolf of Wall Street. Sorry, I meant The Big Short. Watched it once, loved it, did not understand it though. Watched it a second time, understood it a little more. However, ultimately I decided to read the book instead. So I search up the book, order it online, and I look at who the author is, and I come to find that it's Michael Lewis, who is the author of Moneyball as well as Liar's Poker. And I actually noticed that I already have one of his books on my bookshelf. So as I wait for my Big Short copy to come in the mail, I decided to read Boomerang. So in true Pareidolia fashion, I'm going to depict Boomerang by Michael Lewis as a documentary style video. Enjoy. Studying past economic events is crucial for gaining insights into the working of economies and making informed decisions. By examining historical data and analyzing past economical events, we can identify patterns, trends, and causal relationships. This knowledge helps us understand the factors that drive economic growth, stability, downturns, and if you want to predict the future, you must study the past. Europe, a continent rich in history, culture, and economic prowess, but behind its grandeur lies a tale of economic turmoil and questionable decisions. Financial journalist and wordsmith Michael Lewis reflects on the origins and aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis in the Eurozone. In his 2011 book, Lewis takes readers on a tour through Iceland, Ireland, Greece, and Germany, shedding light on the irresponsible and sometimes bizarre behaviors that contributed to Europe's enduring economic difficulties. Our mission? To uncover the underlying behaviors and strange phenomena that contributed to Europe's ongoing predicament. In the first chapter, Michael Lewis takes us on a compelling journey to Iceland, a small Nordic island that became an unexpected participant in the economic bubble burst in 2008. Lewis vividly describes the state of Iceland's economy at the time. In late 2008, all three major privately owned commercial banks in Iceland defaulted, leading to the largest systemic banking collapse in economic history relative to the size of Iceland's economy. The book explains how Iceland's banks experienced an astronomical expansion in just a few years. Their assets skyrocketed from a mere couple of $1 billion in 2003 to nearly $150 billion by 2006 to 2007, a sum several times larger than the country's GDP. This expansion has hailed as the most rapid expansion of banking system in the history of mankind. However, as the global economic meltdown began, Iceland's banks faced massive losses amounting to $100 billion, which translated to roughly $330,000 for every citizen. The bank had accumulated liabilities equal to a staggering 850% of Iceland's GDP, putting immense strain on the nation's financial stability. The Icelandic economy had experienced a period of growth driven by the increasing value of Icelandic currency, the krona. However, Icelanders made a fatal mistake by borrowing money in foreign currencies, which offered lower interest rates. This strategy was contingent on krona's continued rise, but when the housing bubble burst and the krona devalued, Icelanders faced mounting repayments. Many were found with enormous mortgages for houses that were now worth much less than what they paid for. The nation's heavy reliance on imports further exacerbated the economic challenges faced by Iceland. With a devalued currency, Icelanders had to spend more on imported goods, worsening the economic situation. Lewis highlights how Iceland's financial sector became detached from the country's national character. Icelanders were unaware of the activities of investment banks and the consequences of their behaviors until American investment giants like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs persuaded Icelandic bankers to invest in businesses using foreign funds. This led to a surge in consumer spending by Icelandic citizens. However, the apparent profitability of their investment turned out to be deceptive. The banks engaged in the practice of creating fake capital by trading assets among themselves at an inflated price. Previously focused on industries like fishing and aluminum, Iceland's newfound obsession with investment banking had unforeseen consequences. Many were caught up in this frenzy. Even fishermen and cab drivers were involved in this industry. Despite cautionary advice from experts, including Danske Bank in Denmark, warning against investing in Iceland, the Icelandic government disputed the report and accused the Danes of envy. Additionally, when University of Chicago economist Bob Aliber attempted to warn about Iceland's financial bubble, Icelandic financiers tried to suppress his speech. Despite these warnings and concerns, several European banks continued to invest billions in Iceland. Lewis reveals the unethical practices that permeated Iceland's financial system. The creation of fake capital, where assets were traded among banks at inflated values, was a common occurrence. This deceptive practice made the banks appear healthier than they actually were, leading to their eventual downfall. The collapse of Iceland's economy was a wake-up call, challenging preconceived notions about the country's stability. It highlighted the need for caution in the financial sector and the importance of considering long-term consequences. Iceland's meltdown was a stark reminder of dangers of borrowing and leveraging to create a false sense of prosperity. It serves as a cautionary tale for us all. Greece, a country with a staggering debt problem. It owes a massive $400 billion in government debts and faces an additional $800 billion in pension liabilities, totaling a staggering $1.2 trillion. To put it into perspective, that means that every working Greek carries a debt burden of $250,000. But what's intriguing is that, contrary to popular belief, Greece's financial institutions were not the main culprit behind this crisis. So what went wrong? In the 1980s and 90s, Greece faced high interest rates as a lack of trust from creditors, making it difficult for them to borrow. They had no consumer credit cards, or mortgage loans, but in 2000, they had a goal: to become a part of the Eurozone. To achieve this, they needed to meet specific criteria, such as keeping their debt in check, maintaining budgets below 3% of GDP, and achieving lower inflation. And here's where the trouble begins. Through statistical manipulation, Greece managed to meet these criteria, although later it was revealed that they cooked the books. Expenses were moved off the books, inflation was artificially lowered, and taxes on gas, alcohol, and tobacco were slashed. But they didn't do it alone. A company called Goldman Sachs charged $300 million to help Greece get into the Eurozone through a series of questionable deals. This collusion masked the true extent of Greece's debt. Ignoring the true extent of their growing debt, Greece transformed itself into a metaphorical piñata filled with fantastic sums, inviting everyone to take a swing. But what led to this disastrous situation? Greece's financial crisis was not triggered by its banks behaving like American subprime lenders. Rather, it was the government's borrowing spree that brought disaster. Banks lent roughly 300 billion euros to a corrupt government. The financial system became a casualty of the political system, reversing the usual cause and effect. The problem of tax collection exasperated the already dire situation. Tax non-payment and fraud ran rampant, and the slow pace of the legal system only worsened the matters. 2/3 of doctors reported earning so little that they essentially got to pay no taxes. The self-employed became the majority because they could avoid paying taxes. It was a system built on cheating. To hide their assets, Greeks turned to real estate, as the country lacked a national land registry. During the economic bubble, Greece inflated property values using phony reported sale prices. The tax system in Greece enabled widespread cheating, and bribery was ingrained in the government. The Pareidolia monastery provides a small example of how Greeks violated their own economic system. In a national scandal, The monks of this 1,000-year-old complex traded a lake, a former nature preserve they owned, for a higher-priced federal land. Their intention was to create a commercial real estate empire. The Greek government filed suit against the monks, but the actual value of the monastery's asset remained elusive. As the scandal unfolded, Greeks took to the streets in demonstration against corruption and imposition of austerity measures. Strikes and acts of civil disobedience effectively paralyzed the country. Greece, a country known for its rich history and vibrant culture, found itself in the grips of a financial crisis that exposed deep-rooted corruption and shattered trust. In the wake of the global financial crisis, Ireland found itself at the epicenter of a devastating economic meltdown. While the Anglo-Irish Bank emerged as a main culprit, the country's recklessness exceeded even that of Iceland's. As of 2010, according to the book, the Irish banks have accumulated $106 billion in property-related debt. To put things into perspective, this amount was equal to every penny of Irish taxes for the next 4 years. The consequence of the global financial crisis hit Ireland hard, resulting in 14% unemployment and a debt of 32% of GDP. The entire Irish economy had collapsed. Yet, the government remained unchanged, and foreign regulators and experts rushed in to salvage the situation. Let's take a look at the timeline. In the 1980s, Ireland had a population of 3.2 billion, with over 1 million people living in poverty. However, by the 2000s, Ireland became the second richest country in the world, experiencing a rapid turnaround. This transformation was attributed to factors such as deregulation, improved governance, and thriving IT sector. Ireland, once near the top of the list of the world's wealthiest nations, descended into poverty. Trade barriers were dismantled, and negligible corporate taxes were imposed, contributing to the country's downfall. Some pointed to a decline in births as another factor. Economists continued to debate the causes, but it was the Irish housing bubble that bore the primary responsibility for the nation's fiscal woes. The bubble expanded to such a degree that it implied an economic growth rate that would have made Ireland 3 times richer than the United States. Despite declining experts of an oversupply of housing, the bubble persisted. The Irish built homes not for investment or foreign buyers, but solely for their fellow citizens. The debts of cities and states in the United States mirrored the escalating personal debts of Americans, hinting at a larger systemic issue. By 2006, a fifth of the Irish workforce was employed in the construction industry, and the housing sector contributed 25% to Ireland's GDP. Housing activity was booming, with rents falling to less than 1% of prices. However, this housing bubble was bound to burst, as warned by experts. Morgan Kelly warned that when the housing bubble burst, Irish banks would face massive losses. The fact that their primary funding came from overseas sources only exacerbated the problem. In 2008, the global financial crisis erupted, and Ireland was not spared. Unlike the United States, the big shots in banks still got riches despite the crisis. But for Ireland, they witnessed the downfall of its bankers along with the banks. The author suggests that Irish real estate bubble was distinct from that of America. The 2008 meltdown laid bare the truth. Ireland's economy was nothing short of a giant Ponzi scheme. Merrill Lynch initially claimed that all Irish banks were profitable, a statement they later retracted. The aftermath confirmed Professor Kelly's warning. The Irish bankers became national pariahs. Unlike the United States, Irish laws prohibited homeowners from abandoning their mortgages, further fueling public resentment. The Irish government faced a crucial decision during the crisis. they agreed to cover the massive losses of the Irish banks, effectively nationalizing them. This decision was deemed suicidal by the author, as the private debts of the bank were transferred to the Irish people. The government guaranteed not only deposit holders, but also bondholders, providing a safety net for their investments. To avert total catastrophe, the European Central Bank intervened with loans amounting to €97 billion, burdening private bondholders. In January 2009, the Irish government took control of the Anglo-Irish Bank and established its version of the Troubled Asset Relief Program, called the National Asset Management Agency. Unfinished construction projects and vacant homes dotted the Irish countryside. Yet, unlike Greece, Ireland experienced relatively few angry demonstrations. Ireland's economic collapse exposed the fragility of its banking system and shattered the trust between its people and their money. The road to recovery would be long and arduous, as the nation confronted the consequences of its reckless actions. Germany, as the largest creditor, is being closely watched to see if it will provide financial assistance to the struggling European countries affected by the financial crisis. However, Germany's patience is wearing thin. Germany joined the Eurozone with the understanding that it would not have to bail out its neighbors, and it adheres to the rules that cannot accept defaulted bonds as collateral. The situation seems difficult to resolve. If Greece defaults, it could have a domino effect on other European countries and their banks. Germany insists that debtor nations must adopt the same fiscal responsibility it practices, but the likelihood of that happening appears low. Germany's role in the crisis is complex. While Germans themselves did not engage in irresponsible economic behaviors before the 2008 crisis, German banks enabled countries like Iceland and Ireland to accumulate significant debt by funding subprime-backed bonds worth around $200 billion. Some believe that German government is trying to conceal its guilt by funding entities that must repay the debt, instead of allowing mismanaged banks to fail. The German financial sector suffered significant losses and embarrassment due to its banks adopting risky lending practices, reminiscent of those in the United States. Germans are remorseful that German investors were deceived by Wall Street individuals into making bad loans. For example, IKB in Dusseldorf lost at least $15 billion, even during the market meltdown in 2007. German banks continue to invest, demonstrating their vulnerability to false belief in risk-free assets. Following the 2008 financial crisis, market forecaster Meredith Whitney conducted an investigation into the debts owned by U.S. state and local governments, including pension obligations. Her warning about an upcoming crisis in local finances caused an immediate crash in municipal bonds. Despite facing skepticism from analysts, Whitney's predictions proved to be accurate. Over the next 5 years, U.S. states accumulated debts totaling nearly $1.5 trillion, with California being the most vulnerable state according to Whitney's analysis. California remains trapped in this situation due to the laws that allowed public employee salaries to escalate to the point of virtually bankrupting local municipalities. The bursting of the housing bubble further exacerbated the already dire circumstances. California, along with cities like San Jose and Vallejo, have become emblematic of the actions that contributed to the broader crisis in the U.S., where individuals pursued personal gain without considering the larger social consequence. Lewis takes us on a journey across different countries, from Iceland to Ireland and Greece, revealing the common threads that led to their economic downfall. He skillfully uncovers the underlying factors that contributed to the financial crisis, exposing the flaws in the system and the misguided decisions made by governments, institutions, and individuals alike. Through his investigation, Lewis challenges our preconceived notions and highlights the uncomfortable truths about the global financial landscape. Ultimately, Boomerang serves as a wake-up call, urging us to learn from the past and take action to prevent future economic calamities. It reminds us that the consequences of financial mismanagement extend far beyond balance sheets and stock markets. They touch the lives of everyday people and shape the trajectory of nations.